Sup everybody, this is Karak with ACG, and as always it's my continuing mission to bring you reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. What glitters only comes out at night and likes to chew on things? Sure, one answer could be an MDMA raver sucking on a pacifier, but today it's going to be vampires, as told to you through the eyes and ears of developers Don't Nod and published by Focus Interactive in their game Vampyr. And yes, it is pronounced that way because, as we all know, vampires are pretentious douchebags, but maybe not all of them, because in Vampyr, the story surrounds Jonathan Reed, Doctor Extraordinary Plenipotentiary, who gets turned into a vampire and, on his return to London, finds his old stomping ground pox-ridden, basically corrupt and dying, and up to its biteable neck in the undead, and a sorry assortment of people all trying to figure out how to live in a world where the normal streetgoers could have a flamethrower and be able to teleport. Vampyr tells the story of the Doctor's search for a cure and his continued desire to not become a bipedal phlebotomy machine. One part adventure game, one part narrative-focused choose-your-own-adventure, and even a bit of surprisingly deft combat rubbed in on it. Let's see how it did, shall we? Also, thanks to the devs for getting the code early, as that always makes reviews easier. As always, if you like the video, maybe subscribe. So here's my review for Vampyr. Everyone has Eyeshine, the return of LA Noire attack dialogue, and running. Lots and lots of running. Graphics are up first. Comparisons to various games like Bloodborne aside, Vampyr both shows its AA budgetary leanings some moments as well as completely punches above its weight during others. First, the good. Atmosphere is everything in a game. It's that combined layer of graphical effects that don't make you run through a world and it feels like the ground buildings and skyboxes were all made from developers who had no clue what genre they were making and didn't even know they were actually making a game together. Vampyr really does an incredible job with its atmosphere, from the soft lighting sources and heavy fog systems that make you, just for a brief second, think you have to hold in your breath when entering into some murky London dockworkers area, to some excellent weather effects played out across a series of the various burgs within London, all reflecting different monetary wealth. Now, it's remarkable stuff at times, and later locations of West End and an underground home for the down and way out do a spectacular job keeping you visually interested by combining excellent level design and character design, as well as always having a focus on world detail with small graphical cues that will allow you to play the game without the HUD. It is infinitely playable without it. Combat can be a bit tough at first, but once you come to grips with it, this is one of those few games that you could turn the HUD off and you could experience it completely without the HUD, which is always nice. Now, when it comes to animations for both the enemy and the player alike, they range from good to excellent. The first time a holy warrior basically rolls a natural 20 and calls down God to that spot in particular and casts this incredible intense beam of holy light off his cross, it's actually a bit disorienting even for the gamer. Or when Jonathan grips the air with a fist and basically calls the shadows in from the world around him to pull off an ultimate move, or flitting into and out of the shadows in combat and just outside of combat. It's really good work, and in combination with a somewhat heavy particle system, it does a good job mending the action scenes together as well as the narrative scenes, or just the parts where you're running through the town. Now, that doesn't mean it's perfect though. That particle system really doesn't impact Jonathan as much as I would like. There really isn't a lot of blood spatter on him, and especially as much of the killing that he does, you would expect a little bit more. Also, sometimes characters' faces wouldn't load the detailed version of the texturing, resulting in some blocky facial textures that popping out of the area or dropping a conversation and coming back into it would usually fix. Sadly enough, some of the enemies don't really look up to snuff though. Take for instance this guy right here. He shows up and you're fighting him, and it's only a couple seconds into the fight when you start asking yourself, were they skinned prior to the battle? Which of course is automatically going to make you more observant than anybody in the game, because how in the hell does no one ask Jonathan what's wrong with his face? Seriously. When you're running around like Charlie Sheen and the Emperor had the galaxy's most horrifying one-night stand and you're the byproduct, at some point someone's going to ask you what happened. And even if you ignore impossible conception for a second, you're also walking around with 8-ball hemorrhages and your veins popping out and sparkly, glittery gold eyes. And while you constantly heal people throughout the game by saying, man, you look sick, no one ever looks at you and says, man, you look dead. Let's talk about performance for a second. On a current i7 with a 1080 Ti, I was able to get it to run at 4K with a couple settings turned from ultra down to high and get 60 FPS with a couple drops, especially when fog rolls into some of these locations. While a 1070 sees 1080p at 60 FPS relatively easy. Overall, I'd say the PC performance was really tight, especially across the different test systems. Sadly, the game does merge some effects into one option in the graphics options, and you might find that the trade-off impacts the picture a little bit more than you would want if, let's say, you wanted to turn off the depth of field, which can be somewhat strong. Also, the consoles run at 30 FPS, but you do see a bit of stutter now and again, especially once again in the heavy locations with fog. Lastly, when it comes to loading, the consoles in particular sort of suffer from a longer loading time, obviously, than the PC, so just be aware of that. With the X and the PS4 Pro, you do get a very nice super sampling solution or temporal anti-aliasing because there isn't really a noticeable shimmer ever in the game on any of the distance objects like we see with some other anti-aliasing systems and games. Overall, I'd say Vampyr looks pretty damn good, even when compared to bigger budget titles. Some amazing level design and location work, and an eye towards the details of human occupancy in some of these locations to make you feel like, yeah, this is a place that people live in, even if they don't really want to. Sound, music, and voice.
What can you tell me about the recent commotion in the hospital?
Everybody's afraid. Death has always been a frequent visitor.
Ellen didn't bring them with her that night.
I'm sorry for your loss. So many died during the bombings. I served in France and witnessed the carnage there.
And you know what? Let's do music first. While all music, I think, is an acquired taste in games, it's very noticeable with Vampyr. The choice to go with shared instruments playing and fading between really discordant and almost garish moments into what can then be described as industrial harmonies and then back again is a bit of a risky gamble. For me, they pulled it off, but I could certainly see some people hoping that they had gone with the more traditional route. What I like the most about this is you get the same instrument. You didn't get a change from, say, a synth fading into a piano, but carrying on the same resonance. Here, you might have something like a cello. It sounds like it was dipped in oil and bad memories and then fades into more a classical style orchestral themes, but still sort of sounds like it's on the south end of a 7-day bender, which I actually liked. It's a very depressing score overall, that's for sure, but I dug it and I think it really fit. Not as big band orchestral as I think some might expect, though. Sound. This is incredibly well done, with one caveat that I'll get to in a second. Overall, though, it's spectacular sample work, and the environmental sounds are next level. It also has a really good wide channel separation. I got to test this on Atmos, tested on Windows Sonic. Really well done. Headphones or speakers, it didn't matter. It's nice to hear things like, instead of the steady white noise of rain in most games all alone, here you get the sounds of rain hitting burlap covers or the wooden remains of someone's ill-conceived attempts to try to escape town. Also, the specials are spectacular and do a really good job eliciting a feeling of sonic awareness for the things like Jonathan's powers, with the world sounds collapsing and compressing down when he calls the darkness or steps sideways into the shadows for a moment. And everything takes on this dreamy, actually maybe more nightmarish tonal quality. Combat overall is also well done, though I did have to fiddle with the mixing a bit to get the guns sort of to sing where they should have within the sound spectrum. Sadly, it does have one issue. The melding of environmental sounds in buildings is abnormally harsh and quick, and you notice this if you enter any building and it's raining outside and there's an almost instant cutoff of outside sounds. Even if the building has a massive hole in the wall, the lack of subtlety is really noticeable here. Overall, though, I'd say excellent, but with that one caveat: voice. This is done especially well, but there are some hits and there are some misses that I'm going to talk about, especially later on in the game. There's this heaviness and impact of the actions that are taken both voluntarily and involuntarily that start to weigh on the main characters, and I love that. It's really well done and has a nice tonal accuracy. But there are a couple missteps. For example, later in the game, you begin entering into some of the more political machinations that occur in this game world, and you come upon a character that sounds like your best friend's horrible impression of an old guy you met at the grocery store. It's just terrible, especially when compared to everybody else, where there's a good eye on making sure that voices match the appearance overall. Also, there are some LA Noire moments in the game, especially when you get some hints. So if no one remembers what happened in the dialogue choices for LA Noire, look up Cole Phelps Accuses Everyone on YouTube and get back to me in about 11 hours. Vampyr strays stunningly close at times, because when you get some more hints from rummaging through everybody's bug-ridden clothes and you decide to saunter up to the local sausage maker, and instead of giving him a greeting like, "Sup man, heard you like moonlit night walks," you're all, "Swear to me!" I'm not lying, Gary Oldman in The Professional would have had a better bedside manner than this doctor at times. It is really good, but for this much narrative, you have to expect that something's gonna fall, and a couple things did. And of course, that brings us to gameplay and a bit about the story. So you play as Jonathan Reed, brother, son, returning hero to London, an expert surgeon, and one of the dashiest dudes to ever saunter down a street. You've also just become a vampire, and with the first couple minutes, you instantly take some regrettable and life-altering actions while under the curse of your desire to drink blood. You swear to never let it overtake you again as you begin to work with various factions in the city to not only save yourself from vampirism, but also save London from turning into the fetid shithole any town would be if 80% of its citizens looked like they rolled around in Ebola-laced bandages all day. To do this, you basically go around and carry on the dual role of Doctor and Death Machine, exploring the game world and unlocking new mini-bases for you to sleep in and craft in, and chatty Cathy and everyone within 100 yards. Where Vampyr veers incredibly left field from most games is the fact that while there is indeed combat, which I'll cover in a second, a large amount of the game is based on the society and social elements of being a vampire. Every character in the game has a full story and various connections to others like family, friends, or even enemies. And it's pretty easy to tell it's important because the game doesn't have 1 or 2 screens. It's basically got 3 total screens just to track the different elements of the social awareness. Make no mistake, this isn't a Telltale game where sometimes choice seems to be relegated to the 2 quickest routes on how to see the same game ending screen, like a race that always ends in a draw. Here, talking to everyone in the game, you'll learn about them and how they impact others in their lives. As you gain that data, you gain hints, which allows you to ask more questions and find out more sordid details about their lives. In Vampyr, the blood of someone contains their energy and their last memories, so the more you know about someone, the more experience they're worth, if you decide to drink their blood, that is. So in a very strange way, you're interacting with a social leveling system. The more you do, the more you know about them, the more they're worth to you. Here's the thing though, you can't run around the game treating everyone like a friggin' juice pack, because it's a one-shot deal. If you decide to feed on someone, they are dead, and I mean dead. And that's where Vampyr becomes fascinating, because they don't just stop with you getting more experience the more you know about someone, but the last thought they have resonates for moments after you kill them. And let's be honest, some sad sack with no family telling you how scared they are as you kill them hits you like a friggin' fever dream sometimes. I found myself skirting the edges of humanity, trying to find someone like me, basically that no one was going to miss, but wouldn't fill the next couple days with dread as their last thoughts flit through my head every time there was a spare moment. No lie, these can be terrible. Folks thinking about how no one loved them, about how some love affair went wrong, about how family's better without them, how they didn't amount to anything. And since you got to that point by learning about them, everything lines up incredibly well from a narrative point of view and to make the gamer pay attention and care about the characters. It's pretty outstanding to have a full story for everyone in a game too. Also, to do any of this, you have to have a mesmerize skill that is above their willpower skill, and you get that by leveling up as well. So there's this very cool cycle of gameplay that occurs. Now, when it comes to Jonathan and himself, you sleep when you choose to, passing the day and back into the next night. And each time you do, the game tallies who you've killed and what you've done and what quests you've accomplished, and then lowers that location's overall morale from good to full-on hostile as you murder more and more people in each spot. Merchants might change their prices. More militia might be found searching the streets, calling for people to report their neighbors. If Vampyr is anything, it is feedback rich. For example, elements change in the game as districts improve or fall into disrepair, and this is graphically. So sometimes you'll see a change where people finally evacuated and you see stores are boarded up, or there's graffiti saying "stay out" painted over entrances, and the lights that once showed from a lot of these places are now out. This goes a long way in solidifying you into the world space. What's fascinating is Don't Nod continued on this track. See, not everybody gets to evacuate, some don't, and when the shit hits the fan, they end up going missing, and you can go back to a hostile location, and you can find hints to what's happened to some of them. For example, some of them may have turned, others might attack you on sight, other times you'll walk into a building and it's like the world's biggest barbecue happened, and people are just speared up and burned alive because whenever the citizens leave any of the spots, the local militia, hell-bent on stopping vampires at any cost, just promptly kill everybody remaining. It really does help in making you feel like everybody is a real person in this game, and it also makes revisits to location have a little bit more poignancy. When it comes to side missions also versus the main ones, one thing I liked is that you only encounter maybe 5 or 6 collection style quests in the entire game. Most missions always have a story element too, so they never really feel like side missions. They feel like more main missions light. And also the fact is that it really doesn't matter if the information you found was mundane, it always ends up building the lore. Now, of course, you might be thinking, you know what, I'll just kill everybody, or I won't kill anyone. If you kill too many people, as I said, the entire location evacuates and is filled with hostile military presence, as well as more undead who oftentimes can be seen fighting each other, which also adds to a lived-in feeling to the game. This is most likely at some point going to force you to kill someone else just to have a skill level required to beat those enemies. On the other hand, if you don't kill anyone, prepare for a lot of these battles to be incredibly hard. Even low-level guys can do some damage. In combat, you basically have powers, up close, and ranged weapons, all doing damage of their own kind, as well as some weapons having the ability to stun or bleed from a character. Additionally, all enemies have different resistances. Most weapons do have combos, and some of the larger two-handed weapons can also parry, leaving enemies open for counterattack more often than, say, just using stun. Now, like Battleborn, the game funnels you into being a bit more aggressive due to how the battle works. For example, stunning folks is usually much easier with an up-close weapon like a stake, especially early on, and stuns allow for you to suck their blood in combat, and blood powers your vampire skills. But the game also has a stunningly low number of open areas, which means you'll be fighting off 2 undead, a werewolf-looking dude, and then during that same battle, the sounds of fighting will bring 3 militia in, all doing their best Joel Osteen impression to try to call down God's wrath on your face. Once you really start getting into the system and understanding what's going on, I did not expect for Vampyr's combat system to be this fun. The lock-on system works and feels far slicker than many other titles that have used it. And while you can still get caught up on items in the game world, overall, it feels like you just have a really good movement ability while you're battling, whether locked in or not. The various powers you have as a vampire are either locked into assigned keys or the gamepad buttons. Now, the game's weapons are an assortment of guns, knives, clubs, swords, and so forth, and all of them are upgradable, as well as having a slot at each level for you to assign a particular power to them. So you might have a sword that you've upgraded to also absorb blood from enemies, or added stun to some other weapon to give you an opening. When it comes to the skills themselves, as Jonathan goes up in level, he has more skills available to him. Some are locked by how much experience you have, and others by that level. Like a lot of games like this, each skill has 2 branches that open up as you continue unlocking. This matches with the narrative because you don't get too mired down in a new higher vampire suddenly having an entire Gandalf worth of spells available. In fact, the game always does a really good job with the feeling of time, both in the story and in the combat, reminding you that you are new at this. There's no magical forward time teleporting device in the game where you blurt out, oh, 5 years later, and you suddenly are some undead poet throwing down Victorian diss tracks. It's day by day by day. Unfortunately, the game does have a couple issues. For example, the game has locations that doesn't stop you from entering them per se, but they do have high-level enemies in them. So for example, you might have a quest to go and meet with someone, but you can't really find a secret way to do it without fighting the enemies in that level or in that location. And they're higher level than you, for example, and trust me, the game will punish you for that. First, the enemies fight with a series of powers somewhat like you, and some of the major characters definitely exactly like yours. And the game rarely pits you against one character. Instead, you'll find yourself facing down a dude with a flamethrower, a cleric with a staff with a massive cross on the end that can juggle you like nobody's business, and someone with a pistol who just sits back and stuns you every time the other enemies are getting ready to attack. And if they're higher level than you, it only takes a very few hits to kill you. This results in a somewhat forced requirement to kill people in the game outright. It's not a ton of people that you're going to have to, but it's enough that at times I really wished for the occasional place to have more of a secretive approach. Like games prior to Vampyr, going with a spiderweb design for its level structure, though, I have to say, I love that when you go to an important spot, you open up shortcuts via gates that are only openable via that side that allow you to travel back, and that makes revisits far faster. It's always something I really appreciate, especially when there's no quick travel in this. There's also one moment, though, that infuriated me. I was doing fine, but I made a story choice, and the entire district went bad, and I can't say I felt that the choice echoed those later results or really allowed for me to understand why that occurred. It only happened once, but that pissed me off. Fun factor, the game's got some issues, but it's a blast. At times it's frustrating due to the way the game wants you to pile through some of those enemies, but its social aim and the deep characterization of all the characters in the world made me actually care about what was occurring, even if I wanted to just get better in combat. And that combat works especially well. When you level up the stamina, it's certainly easier. It's something that you would want to do if you're a newcomer to this kind of game. But it absolutely attempts to channel Dark Souls or Surge or Bloodborne style gameplay, even in the smallest moments, and I like that, and I think it did a fairly good job for a game that doesn't focus on it. Also, the story is just fantastic. It's told in both direct and indirect ways. The various political twists and groups and enemies and friends and frenemies you keep meeting are really interested, and man, does it feel like, oh, this is probably the end of the game, and nope, you're only about halfway through. So as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch it again rating scale, with rent replacing deep sale on PC. This is absolutely a buy. It is well worth it at full price on the consoles and for the $45 that it is available on Steam for. The game does betray its AA budget at times, but to me, Vampyr is a great example of a title doing something different that I'm not sure a AAA company would do. A lot of the safeguards that we see, even in some other AA games, when it comes to society's impacts and the social decisions you can make, are gone here. Those consequences are hard felt and they are instant, And the inevitable character death of somebody that you actually like is going to hit you even more. Combat's fun and not perfect, but it works to keep you engaged as well. At 25 hours without doing everything and with so many different ways and situations this can play out, I would assume 2 playthroughs at minimum is what I'll do with this title. And it really does show that a game can be far more than the sum of its parts, and certainly not reflect just the budget. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Maybe check out Twitter or Reddit. Or of course, you can become a patron on the Patreon website, which helps me give you guys reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. Stay tuned for more reviews, as well as some breakdowns for the various skill systems and such in Vampyr. Peace out, and enjoy the rest of your week.